Welcome back to Monster in My Closet, the podcast where we shine a light on the professional world's darker corners. I'm Anil Saxena, joined by my co-host, the founder of Medusas, Morgan Hunter. Each episode, we tackle the fears and faux pas that haunt our work lives, with insights, interviews, and a dash of humor, some stupid analogies, and probably swearing. So if you've ever felt like you're navigating a workplace labyrinth, a never-ending approval process, an evil hall of mirrors, or a constantly ending quarter, you're in the right place. Let's confront those monsters together. Are you ready? Let's begin. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Monster in My Closet. So Morgan, today, this week, are we scared or scary?
We're scary. Yeah, we're doing some random shit.
On Halloween, scaring kids for their candy.
Yes.
That's fun when you were a teenager. Or maybe now, I don't know. Anyway, so today we are going to be talking about beneath the cloak of night, unforeseen growth whispers through the corridors of commerce, ready to challenge the foundations of your empire. What if you were wildly successful? So the three topics: asking the question, what happens if you're wildly successful? How do you plan contingencies? And finally, what are the warning signs of being wildly and overly successful before you may be ready for it? So Morgan, what's the genesis of this? Why are we asking this question?
The reason I like to ask this question is because entrepreneurs typically don't think about what it means to be wildly successful beyond hitting a revenue target, right? So they're like, we're going to hit that number, we're $1 billion company, whiz, right? But as we all know, being wildly successful puts an immense amount of pressure on the system. And sometimes when you are super successful at something, it creates bottlenecks, and those bottlenecks kill your business, right? So again, going back to top 20 reasons businesses fail, this is in there, right? Like they couldn't grow fast enough. And when they say they couldn't grow fast enough, it's not that they were getting the money in, they just couldn't make the rest of the organization do what it needed to do. I want to have an episode to talk about how you pressure test the system.
Yeah, it's such an interesting concept because, on one hand, it's like, well, you're making money and that's awesome. And people love your product or they love your service. But then there's this kind of reality check that I can't fulfill on all the stuff that I've sold, or I can't fulfill in the way that I want to be able to. And so you're selling and you're closing deals, but then at some point you reach that sort of breaking point and you're not able to fulfill on the orders that you've sold, and you're not able to renew any of the contracts that you have out there currently. And it takes so much more energy to get new clients and new customers than it does to keep existing ones. There's all kinds of statistics around that. And so as we're kind of thinking about this notion of what if you're wildly successful, what are some of the things that we should be thinking about or planning for to answer that question, what if we're wildly successful?
Yeah, so what I typically do is, I don't have a better way to describe this other than squeezing the tube. So when you look at the process from pipeline and opportunity in the pipeline, all the way through to every single thing that happens, every touch point in your entire organization through to renewal, right? That if, let's say, I'm a new company. If I've only got 2 deals in the pipeline, then it's pretty easy for me to prioritize those. They're both a priority, right? But if I have 100 deals in the pipeline, then I need to have a way to prioritize those and focus my energy and my sales team's energy, and to be able to extract something out of that data, right? So I had an instance where I was talking with a partner and they're like, hey, we went to this thing and we have 300 leads. And I said, how are you prioritizing those leads? And, what's your strategy for following up on those leads? Well, we don't have one. There's too many. All right. So, oh my gosh. So they got the lead, and now, like, literally the next step is the bottleneck. And that's why I think you kind of have to do a table exercise and say, okay, so we've got our leads working. We've made that efficient. We've got leads coming in the door. Now, what's the next step? We need to prioritize those leads. How do we do that? What accommodations do we need? Maybe we need to put a system in place, and that's how we'll get efficient, right? And then you keep squeezing the tube, right? And you go to the next one. It's like, okay, how is delivery going to handle this? Let's say we close 5 deals at the same time. How is the head of delivery going to handle that? Do we have enough people? Do we have this? So you just keep going one step, each step, and applying the pressure to the system as you go through and trying to figure out what changes you're going to need to make. So a little bit of a soapbox here, but what generally happens is people say, oh, I'll just deal with that when it happens. It'll be a good problem to have. It is not a good problem to have. It's a horrible problem to have. It's where things get really ugly and scary. Right?
Yeah.
Because you're burning people out, you're doing things without quality, you're sacrificing any time at all with your family, your sanity, all of that stuff. So it's just a table exercise. And I encourage people to do it like once a year. Just sit down and apply pressure to the system, in a theoretical system, to see where you need to make changes.
Yeah. And I think I totally agree with you. And one of the things, this whole notion of squeeze the tube,
Mm-hmm.
which always, I don't know why, but it always reminds me of the toothpaste tube. And like
Yeah,
whether you
exactly.
squeeze it like in the front, and or you squeeze it in the back, right? Like, what kind of person are you? Are you a like squeeze it from the front kind of person? Because if you are, I'm not sure we can be friends. But I think this whole notion of squeezing the tube, it feels like there's 4 things that you kind of outlined here, in this table exercise. So it's like this notion of how do you operationalize repeatable tasks? So those things that can be operationalized, that can be kind of put into a system or a process, you should do that. And then on a regular basis, you're going to analyze what's working. What are we selling? What are we closing? How long does that take? How long does it take to implement? What's the first thing that goes wrong? All that stuff. And then the third thing is focus on what you're doing and don't expand until you're ready, right? Because it's okay to say no. We've had that conversation on this podcast a couple of times, right? This idea of saying no. And then the final thing is, as you're doing this table exercise, you're going to begin to think about, how do I hire the right people to take on that kind of expanded role? So the right people to take on those operational tasks or those sales tasks or whatever, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to really think through, how are you going to make that happen. The other thing is that as you're kind of thinking about your growth, you want to begin to think about, how do I have a team eventually that's focused on operations and how to make things more efficient,
Yes.
right? It almost seems counterintuitive.
Yeah, there's so I do agree with you that don't press the accelerator until you're ready for the G's, right? But um sometimes you can't afford to do that in business. You have to kind of strike while the iron is hot. So in those cases, what I would say to our listeners, if you're going through the table exercise, do the table exercise, understand where it's going to break, and talk about when it breaks, because we know it's going to.
Yeah.
This is our plan.
Yeah.
So have a plan in place. So when it does, when it hits the fan, you're like, okay, this is what we're doing. We're calling this. We're doing this. We're deprioritizing this. You have a plan at every step on how to handle upsets. But I like what you're saying about like kind of having a team in place, because this squeeze the tube episode, problem goes to any type of operational procedure that you put in place, any change that you put in place, right? So, we've done a lot of implementing of technologies. I've done many, many, many of them in my life. And you can kind of see like early on when you're testing and doing things that, I don't know, the performance is weird here, or this is weird here. And people will be like, no, it'll be okay. It was like, how many people could this possibly affect, right? So you have that conversation.
Yeah.
A lot is the
A lot.
answer.
Huh.
And then you go live, and like literally everybody hits that bug, hits that thing, and you've got 3,000 tickets,
Right.
right?
Right.
And now, okay, squeeze the tube, right? Now you have 3,000 tickets and one support person. So this is why, like, for everything you do, you squeeze the tube and you figure out like what, if you're wildly successful, if everyone does this worst case scenario planning, what do we need? What is the plan?
Right.
When 2,000 tickets come in.
Wow. And I think it's such a, it actually, so it is a good problem to have where you're making more, you're making money and you want
Yeah.
to, and customers are like, I want this thing. But when that starts to happen, and I think I want to ask you a little bit about how you can tell when you're going to kind of flip that switch. But I think when that happens, it's important to really take a step back and think about, how am I going to manage all of this? So,
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the signs that you have seen in I was going to say in your long, long history, but that would make me an asshole. So, in your experience, what are some of the signs that you've seen that's going to happen or that could happen?
It happens very, very early, and it's the attitudes of the people who say, well, that's going to be a good problem to have, or we'll deal with it when it happens.
Mm-hmm.
It's at that moment, like, if you are not willing to have a conversation about the repercussions of being wildly successful and what that really means to your business, yes, it's a good problem, and we need to talk about it, right? So to me, that's really where it starts. I think beyond that, you can look at an organization and see how they prioritize operations within the organization. Do they have people dedicated to operations and operational efficiencies, and really like looking under the hood and making sure everything's running efficiently? And they're the person in the room you can't stand is like, well, that's going to break here and that's going to break here. You need that person to sit there and go through the process with you so that it gets fixed. Unfortunately, I think operational people are the last people companies invest in. And I think operations is the first thing they let go, non-revenue generating roles, if you will, when they need to cut people. So I would say in general, a company's attitude around operations and the value of efficient operations is also a key indicator for me.
Yeah, that's really good insight. And I think, as you're contemplating how to manage that level of success, it's how willing are you to kind of put on the brakes or slow things down or have honest conversations with your clients. I mean, to really be like honest about maybe how they could help or what things they could see.
Hmm?
I know when I was at Gallup, the Q12 was something that rolled out, and it was, I mean, like monumentally successful. It coined the phrase employee engagement. Like it was this thing that kind of took over the world, at least in my little HR kind of experience. And I think one of the things that happened was that operations couldn't support all of the new business that was coming in, and they never said no. And then they became a bottleneck, and then it became a hindrance to selling and fulfilling and getting results back and all of those things. It's that whole, we've seen that a lot, right? Organizations that don't give operations the latitude to say no, and they don't And then the other side of it is the operations folks, and this happens in a lot of kind of services parts of the organization, that they don't really understand the business of the business. And so they don't know
Yeah.
what to say no to. At some point, they just start saying no to everything that falls outside of the kind of box of operations. And sometimes
Mm.
that doesn't make a lot of sense. And so, right, this episode isn't really to set up operations or to bash operations or anything like that. But I think it's important to think about that holistically. How do we begin to, as a new organization,
Mhm.
what are the things that I should be setting out or planning for to if and when this happens, right? Because this is something that you want to have happen, I would think.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing as a new organization is to do the table planning exercise, the squeeze the tube exercise, and have fun with it. I mean, it's okay to say, "Oh, that's going to break." Like, discuss it. Like, what is our plan? How are we going to mitigate that? Or we can't. I think the important thing is if the squeeze the tube exercise means that your customers are going to be impacted, like that's where the thing breaks with the customer experience or the quality of what you're doing, that's not something you can just be like, it's okay, right? That's going to tank your business. And I see a lot in 20 reasons startups fail. They ran out of money. Well, think about this. If you sell a whole bunch of stuff, right, and you're highly investing in sales, which you should, and then everything closes and it goes to delivery, and they're like, okay, yeah, we can deliver that if we hire 30 people. And like, we don't have enough money to hire 30 people. See, that's where the money, in my opinion, that's where the money runs out, is like,
Yeah.
is at the point. So as an entrepreneur, as someone running a startup, what is your financial plan? Like, if you apply pressure and you suddenly need a influx of cash, what is your plan? Because that is the thing that and hiring are the two things that take the longest to execute when you have the problem. You can't just go to Bob's loan office and say, I need $100,000 tomorrow, right? It just doesn't work like that. You can't get quality people on a dime either. It takes time. So be honest with yourself if that's going to be a problem. If finances and procurement of people is going to be a problem for you, you need to start figuring it out at the beginning and not when it happens.
Yeah. Yeah. It's me, Bob's loan office. That is a loan shark. Just so
Yeah.
we're clear, if you if you're going to somebody for an immediate $100,000 loan and they're talking to you about a VIG, that's a loan shark. So
Yeah.
that's not how to run a business, right? And I think it's important to make sure that you're contemplating what's the boundary of my organization in the sense that Ford isn't Boeing. So you're not going to ask Ford to build a flying car, um, because that's, even though they both are manufacturers, they both employ mechanical engineers. That right, they have the inventory. They do all of those same things. They work with steel. They work with metal. They're very different in how they go to business and how they go to market and what they manufacture. And so it's important to make sure that you're not expanding too far too fast. And that, as we've talked about in previous episodes, what you're talking to your clients about is not, no, I can't do that, but what if we did this? Or what if I brought in a partner or other contingencies? Because at the end of the day, in the SaaS world, you want to eventually become a trusted advisor. And
Yes.
your clients are going to trust you if you let them know that, hey, that's actually a limitation, right, that I have. And I wouldn't necessarily use that word limitation, but that might not be something that I can do at the quality that you've become accustomed to, but I do know somebody that could. Or if you want to wait for that, or we could do it a different way. And so,
And
go ahead.
partnerships are a great way
Yeah.
to scale. That is a definite option when you're wildly successful. There's also one of those things that takes planning, right? So if you want to go into a business partnership, you
Yeah.
gotta plan for it. You can't just like hook up with anybody, right?
Right. That's like you're not going to find your next best business partner on Tinder,
That
right?
is exactly correct.
Not that I've ever been on Tinder or really even know how it works, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't have anything to do with finding a business partner. And I think it's also one of those things where, there's all these gig opportunities, right? Fiverr and Upwork
Mm-hmm.
and all that stuff. And those are great, but you also have to be thoughtful when you're leveraging those kinds of organizations as well. And so I think the underlying thing here is just to be realistic about what you are able to do and to not get too far over your skis as you're
Mm-hmm.
out there in the marketplace selling. I see this a lot. My Cherie and I watch Shark Tank, and that there's a lot of entrepreneurs that come in and they say like, we got wildly successful on social media and we weren't able to fulfill all those orders and we had to turn people away or we
Yeah,
had to delay orders or whatever or things like that, and it actually hurts their business.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting problem to have, and one that you really should be thoughtful about.
Mm-hmm.
What am I going to do if this happens?
Yeah. And I want to be really clear. This isn't about total avoidance of risk because any like startup endeavor is going to have risk associated with it. But it's really about understanding what the risks are, acknowledging them, right? And making an informed decision that, hey, I'm going to accept that risk. And and when it happens, this is how we're going to mitigate that.
Yeah.
Not saying this to crush people's business, but to just make thoughtful decisions.
We don't want to be dream crushers. That'll be another
No,
episode.
I hate that.
We're scary because we're crushing your dreams. I think it's more along the lines of let's just be realistic about what are the things that you should be mindful of as you're hanging up your shingle or you're going into business with your friend or you're starting a new endeavor, right? You just want to be realistic about what could happen and and mindful or thoughtful about what are the things that you should do about it. I
Yeah.
think that's what we're kind of pointing to. And it is a good, I mean, like if you're wildly successful, good on you. That's amazing. But there's an after that, right? Like if you get
Mhm.
a zillion orders, what then? If you get a zillion orders and you have 100 things to fulfill those orders, then what? That's the thing that you just got to be thoughtful.
Yeah. 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 What should we leave our listeners with?
Well, I love the notion of the squeeze the tube, like
Yeah.
that. Do that table exercise.
Yeah.
Think about what you might do if you're really successful, what you can operationalize, analyze that data, focus on what you're doing, and try not to do things until you are ready, and hire people that can take on those expanded roles when you need them and plan for that ahead of time, right?
I would add one thing. If you can in any way gain efficiencies and remove bottlenecks by engaging with artificial intelligence, you're in luck. Because there's a lot of it out there. And I would encourage our listeners to really think about the ways that they can pull artificial intelligence into their business to relieve some of the pressure that they might be feeling.
I really like that. That's really smart. Okay, so two things before we wrap up today. So one is, if you like this podcast and we ask that you rate it and share it with your friends. If you don't like this podcast, as I've said before, I don't know why you've listened this long. That seems counterintuitive to me. But thanks, I guess. And the second thing is that we are doing a fundraiser for Medusas, and we ask for you to donate. Please contribute to our effort to really make the SaaS world more inclusive for everybody. And thank you for listening to another episode of Monster in My Closet.
Bye.
Bye. As we wrap up another episode here at Monster in My Closet, we want to thank you, our fearless listeners, for joining us on this journey of exploring what scares us or when we're scary. Professionally, of course. Together, we've ventured deep into the workplace wilderness armed with humor, insights, and a touch of irreverence, and hopefully learned something together along the way. But our journey doesn't end here. Monster in My Closet is proud to be part of Medusas.org. Medusas is a membership-driven, non-profit organization serving underrepresented groups, minorities, and individuals with disabilities who are doing business in the software-as-a-service space. We're a community created by SaaS professionals, for SaaS professionals, and even the SaaS curious. Visit Medusas.org to discover how you can contribute to a movement that empowers professionals to face their workplace monsters head-on. Don't forget to subscribe, share with your colleagues, and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us shine a light on the monsters lurking in the professional closet, making our community braver, stronger, and a little bit wiser. Until next time, keep challenging the status quo, embrace the journey, and remember, no monster is too big when we face it together. Cheers.